Ah, the Atari 2600. The graphics and sounds may have been simple, but for those that grew up with one in their home, the priceless memories will last forever. Not every game was a winner though, and as companies frantically churned out game after game after game in the hopes of cashing in on the video game craze, the Atari 2600's library started filling up with dozens upon dozens of games with varying degrees of quality. Movie studios were no exception to this rule, and as fast as Hollywood could produce films, movie companies were quick to commission programmers to try to get those movie-based cartridges out on the shelves for consumers. It doesn't matter what film it is, just slap the movie poster on an Atari cartridge and sell it. Some of these were actually pretty good, and others, maybe not so much. So let's take a look at Atari 2600 games based on movies on this edition of Friday Night Arcade. First up, Alien, based on the 1979 film starring Sigourney Weaver. 20th Century Fox released this game in 1982 on the Atari 2600, and it was actually programmed by Doug Neubauer, although he's credited on the box as Dallas North. But what can you say about Alien on the Atari 2600? Well, it's Pac-Man. And Frogger too. Pac-Man and Frogger, yeah. Okay, so it's a bit different than the actual Pac-Man. First of all, you get a flamethrower. Haven't you always wanted to take a flamethrower and torch those stupid ghosts? Well, now's your chance! The flamethrower doesn't actually kill the aliens, but it acts as a bit of a deterrent, kind of like in the movies. The manual does at least attempt to tie all of this into the film. You're going around the twisting passageways of the spaceship collecting and destroying alien eggs, similar to the pellets in Pac-Man. If you collect these pulsars, you can actually destroy the aliens just by running into them, just like in the movie. Once you collect all of the eggs, you move into a bonus stage that plays similar to Frogger. The goal is to make it to the top of the screen in 8 seconds or less. Honestly, I never could make it to the top, but thankfully it's just a bonus stage, so at least if you die, you don't actually lose a life. Then it's back to the Pac-Man stage. Can I recommend this one? Well, if you're a really big fan of the movie, it might be cool to have the game box with that iconic alien egg sitting on your shelf as a conversation piece. The sound effects are pretty awful though, even for an Atari game. I'll say this about Alien on Atari 2600, it's probably a better Pac-Man game than the actual Atari 2600 Pac-Man game, so it's got that going for it at least. Based on the major motion picture of the same name, Krull for Atari 2600 is an ambitious title developed and released by Atari in 1983. So there's a lot going on here, including 4 different game modes. I'll confess, I haven't seen the film, but the gist here is that you're trying to rescue a princess from some evil dudes. The manual goes on and on about a mystical prophecy. Okay, here's the TLDR instructions on how to play Krull on Atari 2600. So pay attention, because we're only going to do this once. You start off outside the castle walking along with the princess when all of a sudden you're ambushed and you have to try to stop all of these bad guys with swords and lasers. Eventually, no matter what you do, the princess gets kidnapped and now you're riding on horseback to the lair of the spider. Try to grab as many extra guys and glaive weapons along the way, and now you're in the Widow of the Web. Make your way through the web to the cocoon at the top of the screen, which reveals the secret path to the hidden fortress where the princess is being held captive. Then make your way to that spot on the screen, but you gotta hurry because the path changes whenever the sun goes down, and then you'll have to go all the way back to the cocoon and start over again. Are you with me so far? Once you exit the spider's lair through the secret path, it's back to riding horses and snatching up glaives until the Transformers logo peeks at you from just over the horizon, and now you're in the final battle to rescue the princess from the evil gingerbread man. It turns into a game of Breakout here where you have to throw your glaive and destroy the wall around the princess. This is harder than it looks though, because the gingerbread man, okay, he's supposed to be called the Beast, he can catch your glaive, and if you run out of glaives, you're just kinda screwed. Once you make a big enough hole in the wall, throw your glaive through it so the princess will come out and give you a special fireball that you can use to defeat the Beast. Then the game loops around back to the beginning and you start the whole process over again with increased difficulty. Overall, this game isn't bad, especially for a movie tie-in. However, I wasn't crazy about the spiderweb level. It took a lot of practice to get the hang of this. You're supposed to jump over the moving parts of the web, and if it catches you, you're just kinda stuck. Sometimes you can move in the opposite direction and sorta work yourself loose. Whatever you do, don't get stuck at the bottom, or you'll just be stuck there until the spider eventually gets all mad and kills you. Overall, this is an impressive game given you almost never see this many different game modes in a single Atari 2600 cartridge. The systems going on in the background, like the day-night cycle in the spider's lair, must have been an ordeal to program. The graphics are also about as good as you could ask for, with the detailed and colorful characters. The sound effects are really well done too, such as some of the battle effects or the horse clomping sounds. But man, that spider's lair is kind of a deal breaker for me. Next up, Gremlins. This was totally my favorite movie when I was a little kid. It was actually the first VHS tape of a movie we ever owned in my household. Somewhere along the way, we ended up with a Gremlins game cartridge in our shoebox full of Atari games, and, well, I always liked this game as a kid. It was released by Atari in 1984 and could be played with 1 or 2 players alternating turns. So, like most Atari games, it was a loose clone of other Atari games. There are 2 game modes, the first being similar to Kaboom. You play as Billy from the movie and you have to stop falling evil mogwai from landing on the ground and snurfing up all the cheeseburgers. If they touch the cheeseburgers, they turn into Gremlins eggs. The next screen is a bit more like Space Invaders, with gremlins descending from the top of the screen, and you have to shoot them. The difficulty level ramps up at a nice even pace, so you can actually make it through a few rounds before it goes completely off the rails. The graphics aren't half bad for the time. The gremlins are fairly detailed, and you can actually tell what they are. I also like the sound effects in this one. When the gremlins are stomping down toward the bottom of the screen, it sounds all ominous. It's nothing groundbreaking or special, but I enjoyed this game for what it was. Ghostbusters. Who you gonna call Ghostbusters? Ghostbusters on Atari 2600 is not that bad. For the time, it's actually impressive. There are several different game modes and some intricate systems at play. It's one of those complex Atari games though, so if you don't know what you're doing, it could be a little frustrating. Definitely not a pick up and play game. You're gonna want to take some time with the manual. So the game starts off and you have to buy some supplies, you know, from the Ghostbusters store. Go ahead and buy one of each of the top 3 items. A ghost sensitivity viewer that helps you see the ghosts better, a ghost vacuum for Ecto-1, bait that can be used on the Marshmallow Man, and then however many traps you can buy. Once you've purchased everything, flip the left difficulty switch and the game begins. This takes you to the map screen where you get to drive around town catching ghosts. The object of the game is to catch enough ghosts to get to $10,000 before the PK energy meter reaches 9,999. When you see a flashing building, move the Ghostbusters logo to it, which represents the Ecto-1, and then you actually get to drive the Ecto-1 to the building. Once you get there, deploy a trap to try to catch Slimer and make some cash. This can be a little tricky, but with some practice you can get the hang of it. Push the button to open the trap, although if you miss, Slimer will slime one of the Ghostbusters and escape. Back on the map screen, occasionally you'll see these ghosts flying around. You can drive to them and catch them with the vacuum on the Ecto-1 as well, and once the PK meter reaches a certain point, the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man even shows up. Use the right difficulty switch to drop the bait that you purchased and try to lure him away, but if you don't get it down fast enough, he'll smash an entire city block and you'll lose all your money. Overall, this is an impressive game for the system. The graphics are good, there's even some music, albeit it's a little repetitive, and you get multiple game modes. This was initially developed for the Commodore 64 by David Crane, who also developed Pitfall, and Gary Kitchen also helped port it over to the Atari. Great job, fellas. Also, make sure you don't cross the streams. What do you get when you combine River Raid and Operation? Fantastic Voyage, developed by 20th Century Fox and released in 1982. This was based on the 1966 movie of the same name, where a group of scientists are miniaturized and injected into an injured patient to repair a blood clot inside of his brain. That's basically the premise of the game. It's a vertical shooter with a twist. You've been shrunken down and injected into a patient and tasked with taking out anything that could harm the patient, ultimately culminating with taking out a giant blood clot. The twist is that you don't necessarily want or need to shoot everything. In the first phase, there will be these little sticks that fly across the screen, which are defense cells. You can shoot those for points, but if you miss, that's okay. However, these little key-looking things are actually enzymes. If you hit those, the patient regains health, but if they pass you, it actually harms the patient. There's more stuff that can harm the patient if you let it go past you as well, like these antibodies and there's bacteria. However, in the second phase, there's these blood cells. Don't shoot those or it will actually harm the patient. The patient's health is represented at the bottom by this heartbeat monitor, which beats faster and faster depending on how much damage the patient has taken. It is a bit repetitive sounding, but it also kind of adds to the tension. Eventually, when you get to the last stage, You'll have to dodge these clotlets that are indestructible, and if you make it to the end, there's an oversized blood clot that takes 15 shots to destroy. Blow it up, and then you start back from the beginning with increased difficulty. This is an enjoyable vertical shooter, and the added twist of not actually being able to just shoot every single thing that moves gives it a little bit of variety. You have to really pay attention. I also like the controls, which are smooth and let you speed up or slow down by pressing up or down. You gotta really watch it when the arteries narrow. The sound effects aren't anything special, but this is not a bad game at all, especially for being a movie tie-in. King Kong. No, not Donkey Kong, King Kong. Released by Tiger Vision in 1982, and this was their first official release. I actually really like the box art for this one. As for the game itself, well, Okay, so the premise here is that King Kong has captured the damsel and has her at the top of the Empire State Building. You play as this ridiculously slow guy who has to get to the top of the building and save her while King Kong with Stewie's head hucks bombs at you from above. These blue-colored bombs are magic bombs, and if you jump over them, it carries you up to the next level. Otherwise, you just have to use the ladder. There are gaps in the floor that will kill you if you fall through, and once you get about halfway up the building, Kong goes hopping mad and goes down to the lower level, then all of the bombs change directions and start moving upwards towards you. There's a tune that plays over and over again in the background, which is okay, but definitely gets repetitive. Speaking of which, the game is just this one screen. There are no other levels, although the bombs all get faster and faster after you rescue the girl. And that's where this game gets to be not much fun. Your character moves slow as molasses. Even when the bombs get faster and faster, your character just plods along. I will say that jumping over the bombs is pretty forgiving, but after the first round, this just gets to be dull and frustrating. The actual Donkey Kong port on Atari is more fun than this, and that's saying something. Interestingly, this was released right around the same time as Universal Pictures was in the middle of a lawsuit with Nintendo over the similarities between King Kong and Donkey Kong. Nintendo won the lawsuit when the courts ruled that the plot and characters of King Kong were public domain and that, if anything, Donkey Kong was more of a parody of King Kong than a blatant copy. In the 70s, there was this infatuation with disaster movies. Films like The Poseidon Adventure, the airport films, Earthquake, The Swarm, and the movie which this next game is based on, The Towering Inferno, starring Steve McQueen and Paul Newman about a group of survivors trying to escape a burning skyscraper. The Atari 2600 game is loosely based on the premise of the film. You play as an unnamed fireman tasked with entering a burning building to rescue survivors. Instead of battling enemies, you're battling flames. Armed with a water hose, the concept here is that you're trying to rescue 4 survivors on each floor of the building, with each screen representing a separate floor. You start out at the bottom of the screen and have to make it to the top and smash out the door, then make it all the way out of the bottom of the screen the way you came in. The idea here is that the survivors are trapped behind the door, and they're following you back out to the exit, although you can't actually see them. The catch here is that each floor has a timer. The longer you take to get to the door at the top, the more survivors perish from the flames. So it's possible you may get to the top and only rescue some of the survivors. Take too long and they'll all die, and then you have to start over, or if you run into the flames, you'll have to start all over as well. You can extinguish the flames with your fire hose or try to go around them, although the flames can be pretty unpredictable. And like any Atari game, the further up the building you go, the higher the difficulty, with shortened timers and increasingly erratic flames. Each building has 9 floors, and there are a total of 9 buildings in the game, so technically it's possible to beat this game, although I don't know of anyone that has. Still though, it's actually not a bad game at all, and a nice change of pace from the usual shoot everything that moves gameplay of most Atari games. Well, here's an example of a game that could have been something great with a few tweaks, but unfortunately what we got was a mostly unplayable mess. James Bond 007, released by Parker Brothers for the Atari in 1983. It's not just based on one movie, but 4 James Bond movies: Diamonds Are Forever, The Spy Who Loved Me, Moonraker, and For Your Eyes Only. Gameplay is Moon Patrol, but awful. Okay, so you play as James Bond, and the manual states that you get to take control of an awesome, all-terrain James Bondiest type of vehicle with all sorts of cool weapons. I'm not sure why they bother though, because you can't actually shoot the enemies. That's right, kids. So you're driving along and all of these helicopters and satellites are shooting at you, but they're somehow invincible. Huh. Okay, so you can shoot these diamonds that occasionally pop up, and these give you points as well as light up the sky briefly. And you'll need that because the objective of the first mission is to land on this oil tanker, which is invisible for some reason. You can only see it when you shoot the diamonds. You can control the vehicle similar to Moon Patrol, up jumps, and you can even float for a little bit. In the second stage, you can dive underwater briefly, and here you have to avoid these frogmen, which release radioactive material in the water. These radioactive spots are incredibly difficult to avoid hitting. There's also these ships that shoot up out of the water and release poison into the air. And then there's these underwater jet skis that fly by and shoot stuff out their rear end at you. So you have to constantly be moving between up in the air and into the water. Your vehicle can shoot bombs at a downward angle as well as a gun upwards, but you have no control over what shoots next. It just alternates back and forth between the two. Also, the play control is just downright terrible. It's just really, really bad, and I'm not even exaggerating. You never really feel like you're in control of this thing, and it's about like trying to maneuver a hot air balloon. It's too bad because I think this could have been a really neat game with a little more polishing. Although graphically the game doesn't look as good as Moon Patrol, it's cool they tried to have a variety of stages, and I do like the lighting effects of these searchlights on the helicopters. It'd be nice if the guns actually did something besides shooting diamonds. The play control could have been much better, and they could have toned down on some of the cheap deaths. Overall, it's just a shame. Well, what did you think? Did you play any of these games growing up? I know I've only scratched the surface on Atari 2600 movie games. What are some other ones you'd like to see covered here on the channel? If you can name off enough of them, I'll do a follow-up episode at some point. Well, as always, thank you for watching. Please don't text and drive, and I'll see you next time on Friday Night Arcade.